Skull Island: Rise of King Kong is the most recent game to be released from Iguanabee. This is a studio that really doesn't have much of a history, and considering this to be the case, it's weird that they were able to pull the license for King Kong to begin with. However, this is not the first time they've done this. I believe they released a game in 2020 that had a similar principle of utilizing an IP and then kind of just pushing that to get new players. It looks like that was G.I. Joe Operation Blackout, which was also released to pretty poor reviews. However, it clearly worked well enough for them to say, fuck it, let's get another IP and do it all over again. The game released on Switch, PlayStation 4, 5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series XS, and then also PC. The game costs a whopping $40 or even $55 depending on which edition you get, which is absolutely psychotic considering this game looks like it was made for the PS1. If I'm being generous, maybe it's a really cheaply made PS2 game. And the alarms were sounding way back when I first saw the trailer for this, because even in the trailer you could tell that this game really has no idea why it's even a thing, and on top of that has so little effort put into it that they could have even robbed better assets from other games, like free assets and whatnot, but instead what they do is they create just the most disgusting looking possible assets that are like weirdly kind of trippy, and then on top of that also very bland at the same time, which I don't know how you do that either. There's a lot of weird bits about the saturation and the contrast in here as well, and even the white balance, I would say. Like, for some reason, your gorilla looks blue a lot of the times, like the skin is blue, and then on top of that, when we go from like King Kong's mother, which you play in the first like level, then going over to King Kong, you'll notice that the character is exactly the same. The asset is the same, and basically they just literally changed the color of the fur. Went from being this silverish grayish fur to being just a straight brown fur. The level design is super uninspired and basically is just extremely confusing because everything looks exactly the same. There's no real way to tell if you're progressing properly or not, and on top of that, every area just again looks exactly like the last. On top of that, we kept getting this very strange bug where it looked like the camera was being dragged on the ground behind King Kong, and so it would constantly do this jitter movement thing. It made it hard to look at and hard to fucking stomach, and basically gave me some motion sickness. And now you may be asking, what type of game is this? Is it just a straight platformer? Is it a puzzle game? Well, it's a Souls-like game. Basically, you go in and you fight various enemies and you lock on to your target. However, there's no variation in gameplay because, it's not like they have different weapons that Kong can get or anything along those lines. You basically just have a regular and a heavy attack, and then you can also dodge as well as you can parry. So it's basically just a rip directly from a Souls type game. And on top of that, like even the first boss that you face, you're supposed to die to, similar to pretty much every Souls game. You really don't feel like you're doing anything when you hit the fucking various enemies, which most of the enemies are just weird spider looking things, or they're these dinosaurs. And it feels like you really don't do much the entire time because you just do the same move over and over and over again, which is slap, slap, clap. The parrying mechanic is pretty much not necessary to use whatsoever, and on top of that, it feels super fucking janky. And the dodge mechanic as well is just, it's fine, but at the end of the day, it's really terrible when it comes to the hit detection. Sometimes you'll get hit by enemies that are nowhere near you in any way, shape, or form, and it's almost like it doesn't detect that you've rolled sometimes when you already have. Like, it still thinks that you're up next to the enemy so you can be easily smacked, which is not the case. On top of that, there is the jumping mechanism where you can basically jump kind of decently far distances. It feels similar to the Incredible Hulk game on GameCube from 2004, where basically you could power up your jumps and you could jump really far and really high as Hulk. However, that game felt much less janky than this one. It made it worked, generally speaking, a lot better. It didn't have some of the camera glitches that this had, and on top of of that, that game had completely destructible environments, which was the main pull for that Hulk game. This has none of those interesting factors, and that many more glitches. The faces that the King Kong character and the King Kong mom make is so fucking funny. It's so absurd and ridiculous that it's become a meme in of itself at this point. Like, I just don't know how you can sit there and make this game and then play it in any way, shape, or form and say, hey guys, we should put this out. Like, no, why did this not get scrapped? And it just makes me think that in the good year of our Lord 2023, that the industry of gaming is definitely kind of getting too big for its britches, okay? There have been so many broken games released, so many games that are clearly just put out in order to make a quick buck and to capitalize off of the giant market there is right now, that it feels like sooner or later something might burst, like the 1983 gaming market crash, but who knows? Regardless, though, this kind of all brought up a memory of a game from 2005, actually, nearly 20 years ago, called Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. Now, the title is not exactly amazing. However, this is a game that released back in 2005 over on PlayStation, Xbox, also on PC, GameCube, and a couple other things. And basically, it saw you play through the various events of the film. And it even utilizes some of the actual scenes from the movie in the game to set everything up. Immediately upon remembering this game, I said, okay, let's go ahead, let's download it, and let's kind of compare these two games. And I will say that this game really puts into perspective how bad the Skull Island Rise of Kong actually is. This game came out about 20 years ago, and I would rate this still current day, probably like at least a 2.5, even current day, or even maybe a 3 out of 4 stars, where the Rise of Kong's Skull Island is probably a 0.5 out of 4 stars. I've never given something a 0, but this is getting pretty fucking close to a 0, so you know what, maybe this will be the first 0 we give, guys. But essentially, when we go over to the 2005 King Kong game, what we see is already the graphics are better, which is very funny considering how old this game actually is, and we can see that even though the controls are a little janky because of how old the game is, and back then controllers were very different, at the end of the day, this game plays so much smoother and looks so much better than a game that came out 20 years later. You basically start off on the boat and you go through and you see a little bit of the scenes that, get you onto the boat heading to Skull Island, and then you get to the actual island and you have Jack Black's voice actually in the game, and on top of that, you basically play as Jack, one of the characters from the boat, as you go on and you explore the island. You basically have to save your various other people around, like the movie director, as well as Naomi Watts' character, from being killed by various centipedes, or they have these kind of crab-looking type things. The shooting mechanism feels pretty fluid, feels way more fluid than any of the shooting mechanisms or the punching mechanisms of the game, Rise of Kong. On top of that, the atmosphere is fantastic in this 2005 game. The lighting is pretty dim, but gives it this really creepy, natural feel. And on top of that, you go through these rough waters just to get onto the island to begin with, and rocks are caving down all around you and fall down and crash your ship, making you have to go ashore and then, fend for survival over there. It really feels quite creepy. And then on top of that, you go and you have to choose what weapons you're going to utilize. You can either use a pistol or a shotgun. The shotguns don't have nearly as much ammo, but you can only hold one thing at a time. So you're only going to be able to use either the pistol or the shotgun, or maybe you can pick up a melee weapon, which I would say that this is going to be the most frustrating part of this game, besides some of the controls not matching up because controllers being different back in the day. It is kind of annoying when you have to put down, say, like a gun instead of waiting to get ammo, so that way you can pick up some melee weapon that seemingly breaks fairly really quickly and you can't even use to its fullest extent anyway. And on top of that, there aren't enough melee weapons spread about. However, I would say that the enemy types are very fun and they're much creepier than the kind of dinosaurs and other spider-looking enemies that you get in Rise of Kong. On top of that, the area is very expansive that you're able to go through, and you go from being on the beach to inside like caves and whatnot. And I would say that this is where you start to get a lot of the horror as well. When I went into the first cave here, you basically started seeing these various creepy crawly enemy types, and those enemy types are not even lit up at first, so you can just kind of hear these creepy crawlies moving around this cave, and you can kind of see them a little bit until your NPC buddy pulls out a torch and lights up the area so you can see everything. And then you see that you have all of these various different crab-like enemies, and on top of that centipedes and all sorts of stuff that are going to fight you. Centipedes have this really creepy attack where they kind of get back on their hind legs and then just lunge at you. It's very creepy to watch happen, and definitely having certain phobias myself gave me some made me itch all over, I'll say that much. On top of that, the character design is actually really good. Jack Black looks like Jack Black, Naomi Watts looks like her, and considering again that this was made so long ago, putting people into games has become a lot more common now, but wasn't always the mainstream thing to do. So seeing them be able to get the actual actors to voice and put in the game is really fucking dope as well, and makes everything feel that much more realistic. Plus, being a fan of the movie myself, being able to actually go through and kind of play through these parts of the film was really fun. So let's recap. It looks better, it plays better, it feels better, it is more original than, and it came out 20 years prior to the Rise of Kong Skull Island game. You get dunked on in every possible way except for controller capabilities from a game that was made 20 years prior. You've really fucked up. What do you guys think? Do you guys remember playing this game from 2005? Did you enjoy it? Did you dislike it? Have you guys seen this Rise of Kong game, and have you played it yourself? Besides that, what do you think should be the future of video games in the way of Kong? Do you think that they should try to make some, maybe even a Souls-like game, but put some more tender love and care into it? Or do you think that it just never is going to be as good as this 2005 game, and so just fuck it, don't do it? Let me know your thoughts, as well as anything else you want us to discuss down in the comments below. Besides that, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. That'll pop up during the outro, and the rest of our links are down in the description too. We have Gamin sessions for gaming content here, movie sessions for trailer content, Smokin sessions for movie news and reviews, CrazyRocky for variety content, and the Try Podcast for our podcast channel. Alright guys, I'll see you all in the next one.
Abducted by my brain and it drains all the dopamine. Pain leaving nothing but the dreams that have been holding me. Reality cracks and it falls at the openings. Blasted out center just to see all the broken dreams. Trapped in a track to be feeling like an acid dream. Feeling like I'm floor keeper casting me snitch on reality glitches. Retaliate wish, turn the mountain upside down to